Tale of Three Kings, A Study in Brokenness. By Gene Edwards. Summary. Saul, the first king of Israel, united the people and established a kingdom. He gathered people who were almost free of fraud and transformed them into God's army. With God's power, he achieved victory in wars and defeated the enemy. Saul was once a man who was filled with the Spirit of God, and he performed amazing deeds chosen by God. On the other hand, David showed a life of submission to God rather than his own authority. He demonstrated the power of patience rather than resolving issues through rules or laws. He did not tell people to follow him, and he did not care about stepping down from the throne. He taught and demonstrated giving instead of taking, and losing instead of winning. Meanwhile, Absalom was a person with discernment who could identify the core of any problem. As he sat in his room and talked, he became increasingly aware of the wrongdoings happening in his country. He was also humble enough to show respect for the current leader by the end of the gathering. They are the three first kings of the Israelite kingdom who showed remarkable achievements and abilities, receiving enthusiastic support from their followers. However, their stories go in completely different directions. This story was written for readers who have been hurt by authoritarian actions in faith. But a much wider range of readers have read this book, and they were people who experienced hurt from division and conflict among Christians, as well as political division among Christians. The story of the three kings was written to provide practical advice for Christians who have experienced despair from authoritarian actions of other Christians. Through this story, I hope they can recover and regain hope, continuing to walk with Christ. Story begins with the following prologue. God spoke to Gabriel. Go and take 2 parts of my being. 2 fates await. Give each of them one of them. With the 2 lights of life pulsating intensely, Gabriel opened the door and disappeared. The chamber of destiny for the 2 yet to be born. I have here 2 parts of God's being. The first is the clothing closest to God's nature. As it envelopes you, it will clothe you with the mighty breath of God, and as the waters envelop the sea, so will his breath envelop you. With this breath that clothes you, you will rule armies, dishonor God's enemies, and make a name for yourself. Here is the power of God as a gift. A destiny came forward. I believe this part belongs to me. Good night. And remember, the person who received this part will surely be known to many people. Before your life is over, by means of these powers your nature will be known and will indeed be revealed. This is the fate of all who wear this being and exercise it. For this fate only touches the outer man and does not affect the inner man. Therefore, an outward force will always reveal its inner source and deficiency. The first fate received a portion of God and stepped back. Again the angel spoke. Here is the second being of the living God. This is a legacy, not a gift. Gifts clothe the outer man, whereas inheritance, like a seed, takes root deep within. Although this is a very small seed, it will grow and eventually fill the whole inner man. Another fate came forward. This is mine. Yes. Remember that what you have been given is glorious. The only element in the universe that changes the human heart, this is the most basic element of God, but it cannot grow and fill every part of your inner man. It has to be mixed with pain and sadness and frustration. The second fate took a back seat. Angel Recorder asked Gabriel, "What will these destinies become when they pass through the gate to this world?" Gabriel responded softly, "They will both be kings in their time." Act 1. The story of Saul and David. Chapter 1. David the shepherd is anointed. This shepherd boy who was a master stoner and singer also loved God. At night, when all the sheep are asleep, he starts his own recital with the harp while watching the fire go out. Sing old hymns that sing of the faith of our ancestors. He begins to sing praises with all his heart, sobbing and sobbing as he sings. The distant mountains carried his praises and cries to higher mountains, where they continued until they reached the ears of God. When he is neither praising nor crying, he takes care of the sheep one by one. God searched door to door throughout the country, looking for that very special person. As a result, we found this poet with a strong voice. He was a man who loved God with a purer heart than any man in the sacred land of Israel. Let's see. The Anointed of God. It was a great day for the young man. However, this extraordinary event did not lead this young man straight to the throne, but to 10 years of hellish days of pain and suffering. That day became the day David entered the school of brokenness, not the king's rank. Finally, David ended up living in the castle of a mad king. And in situations as incomplete as the king, David learned many things that were essential to him. Chapter 2 In the Castle of a Mad King. David found himself in a very uncomfortable situation. Nevertheless, he seemed to have a deep understanding of this drama that had not yet unfolded in him. Things that even the best sages of the day couldn't understand. So what is it? People who have gone through the pain. The kind of people God was looking for but couldn't find. It was that God wanted a broken bowl. God has a school. It's a small school. Why are there so few students in this sacred school of obedience and brokenness? It is because of so much pain that everyone in this school has to go through. David was once a student at this school, and Saul was God's chosen way to break David. As the king grew more and more insane, David came to a deeper understanding. He knew that God had placed him in the king's court under true authority. David took a deep breath and went deeper down the hellish road to the maniac king who threw a spear at him. If God had not removed Saul from the heart of David, David the shepherd would have grown into King Saul too. The removal operation actually took years and was a merciless experience that almost killed the patient. Then, what was the scalpel and tongs that God used to remove Saul, the inner man? God used Saul, the outward man. David accepted this fate. He embraced cruel circumstances. He went through the ordeal in silence and alone. Finally, all of his inner man was severed. His character has changed. When his flowing blood clotted, David was almost unrecognizable. Chapter 3 Leaving into the Long Winter. How do we know that it is finally time to leave God's anointed? David didn't decide that himself. A decree issued by the king himself solved the problem. Get him. Kill like a dog. Then David left. No, he ran away. Even then he did not say a word, did not retaliate against Saul, and left alone without dividing the kingdom. The cave is not an ideal place to boost morale. This man who became the prey had nothing more than when he was a shepherd. After a long time, David arrived in a foreign land, where he was also slandered and several times nearly killed. These circumstances were the darkest times for David. He sang a lot. And all the tunes were paired with tears. Some songs were blood-freezing. Isn't it strange how suffering produces? The grieving David in those caves became by far the greatest hymn writer and the greatest comforter to all the broken hearts the world will ever know. Pain was finally starting labor. Humility was being born. By world standards, he was a complete failure. However, in the eyes of heaven, he has become a broken man. When the men who had fled the king's madness finally met David again, they did not recognize him. He has changed, his words decreased, but he grew to love God more deeply. They submitted to a man without fear of obedience or authority, or even without thinking. They didn't invent rules, and they couldn't find the word legalism, but they kept their lives clean from the outside. Slowly, their inner world began to change as well. David spoke slowly when Joab excitedly questioned David for not killing King Saul, whom he had put at the point of the spear several times while continuing his precarious life of flight. It was God who made him king, not man. I will not take the road that drives kings mad. That night people went to bed on the cold, damp rocks. The angels also went to bed that night. And I had a dream in the evening glow of that eccentric, very special day. That God would now give his authority to one trustworthy person. Chapter 4 Saul vs. David. Saul was one of the greatest people in human history. He united the people and established the country. He was a leader chosen by God who, by the power of the Holy Spirit, did wonderful things for God. Saul was given the authority of the one and only God. However, he became obsessed with jealousy, and he was willing to live in spiritual darkness, such as plotting murder. People often pray to receive power from God. Every year more people pray for it. But hidden beneath such prayer and enthusiasm is ambition, a hunger for fame, and a desire to be seen as a spiritual giant. The person who prays such a prayer may not realize this himself. God grants that petition even though their insides are like the heap of dead people's bones, so that in the end all people see the true face of the inward nakedness in that person. And God's gift, once given, is not revoked even if there is sin. Those among us who succeed Saul often crucify David among us. He belongs to the line of David, but we know of a man who was cursed by humans and crucified. Then, who is David and who is Saul? God knows. But you don't say it. So what can you do? Almost none. There may be none. The passage of time, and your reactions to that leader, be it David or Saul, will reveal a lot about you. Act 2 The story of David and Absalom. Chapter 5 Ambition is born. This imposing and sensible man would never be in a hurry to rule, and the people certainly knew this. Because he was very humble and had so much respect for his current leader. Those around him began to get a little nervous at the thought of continuing to wait for a better day for this man to rule. Unpleasant things they had never thought of before and problems they hadn't even dreamed of were appearing. As the days passed, more and more people gathered around him, and the news spread quietly. No one can be expected to sit quietly all the time. The young man finally roused himself to action. Rebellion had occupied his mind for years. Sage. Yes. Then what kind of man is Absalom? He was both loyal and ambitious. He will continue to be ambitious even after realizing that he will not be able to deliver on the promises he made. Correcting wrongs is always a secondary task by rising to power. Two things come to mind. At one meeting, Absalom emphasized the need for more freedom in the country. We must follow God, not men. I remember him saying that. Everyone loved it. And in another meeting he spoke of his great ideals of the kingdom of God, and of the many reforms he was about to accomplish. He made two claims that cannot be reconciled. He truly reminded me of countless people I have met over the years. As you know, there is no kingdom without discord. Then he will try to dictate, but this time he will rebel against Absalom. He who ascended the throne through treason has no patience to put up with other traitors and their treachery. One thing is certain, in the spiritual realm, a rebellious person is already a thief, no matter how lofty his words or how angelic his actions may be. God never respects divisions within his kingdom. Now, I'm going to go. Sage, tell me what your name is. My name. I say. Chapter 6 Absalom vs. David. David cried out to himself. Wait, Absalom. I've been waiting and waiting for years. I asked and asked again. What's in this young child's mind? But now I know you will do the unthinkable. You are trying to divide the very kingdom of God. Everything else is just words. Come on, good King David. What are you going to do now? The kingdom hangs on the weights and it seems you have two choices. Lose everything or become Saul. I can control Absalom. You just have to be Saul. Should I become Saul in my old age? God is also waiting for my decision. Abishai opened her mouth to confirm once again. King, you were not like Absalom, and you will never be like Saul. But if you do not stop Absalom, you will have to surrender the kingship. Because Absalom will surely take his place. The wise old king answered this. Think about it. God rescued a powerless shepherd boy from a powerful mad king. He is also the one who can save the old king from the ambitious young traitor. David, do not underestimate your adversity. Abisi. Like I said, no one knows their heart. I don't know my heart either. How do I know what's really on my mind? Perhaps in God's eyes I am no longer able to rule. I seek His will, not His power. Well, now I have to sleep. I have something to discuss tomorrow, so send the prophet Zadok. A small, soft voice escaped from Abishai's mouth. Good king, thank you. The light of respect on Abishai's face was complete. What do you mean? The king, who was going around the gate, was puzzled and asked him. Thank you for what you did and did not do, that you did not throw a spear, that you did not rebel against kings, and that you did not expose a leader with so many loopholes. And for not dividing the kingdom, and for not attacking Absalom, who looked very much like young David, but was not David. He paused. And thank you for your suffering and your willingness to lose everything. Thank you for giving your country to God to work, and even your country if it pleases Him. Thank you for setting an example for all of us. And above all, he laughs. Thank you for not consulting the magicians. Chapter 7 Broken Hearts in the Wilderness. Zadok, thank you for coming. My king, David. You are a priest of God. Can you tell me a story from long ago? What are you talking about, my king? You know the story of Moses, right? Then tell me about Korah's rebellion. Zadok stared at David with burning eyes. David also looked at him with burning eyes. The two knew. One peaceful morning, Korah woke up. There was no discord among God's people that morning. But before the day was over, Korah had found 252 people who sympathized with his accusations against Moses. Korah and his followers approached Moses and Aaron. He told Moses that he had no right to exercise all the authority he had. 40-year-old Moses was a proud and wayward man, not much different from Korah. But the 80-year-old was a broken man. That broken heart faced Korah. And I believe that the king already knows what Moses did. He didn't do anything. Moses fell on his face before God. That was all he did. Moses told them to bring a censer and incense the next day. Then God will decide the matter. And finally, Korah and his two friends were swallowed into the ground. And 250 others died too. That's how humans fight to be king. David shook his head in embarrassment. Zadok paused, then spoke again. David, I know that you are tormented by the question of what is true authority and what is not. I believe that you will find the only pure path, and that you will. In doing so you will teach us all. At that moment, the door opened and Abishai hurried in. Good king. Absalom, your son, your kinsman, has proclaimed himself king in Hebron. Some of those closest to you have also sided with him. Chapter 8 Rebellion and Another Departure. How could this be? A son going against his real father. When a country is vulnerable, you see all sorts of strange sights. Abishai, what do you think of this? What do you think? In response to Joab's anger, Abishai responded. Here's what I think. Absalom has no authority in this country. He stretched out his hand toward God's anointed. If Absalom is still doing these things, what will he do when he becomes king? David and Zadok were alone again. I hate these moments the most. Zadok, but I'm removing all the reasons and looking into my heart and removing the desires of the heart. Perhaps I have sinned so much that I can no longer rule. Only God knows if that's true, but I don't think He's going to say His word. But I'll give you enough room in the present situation so that today this unspeaking God must appear. I can't see any other way to solve this bizarre case than do nothing. I'm leaving the castle. The kingship now belongs to the Lord. I will not be hindered in the least from doing His will. God, please be God. The true king turned and walked quietly out of the city. He walked and walked into the hearts of all who are pure in heart.